Hello, this is Eric Teitelman with the Jerusalem Connection Truth Report for this week. This month, the Jewish people all over the world are celebrating the feast of the Passover. I often get asked a question, and that is, what is the actual meaning of the Passover? Many people have never actually observed a Seder, and Christians will often also ask me, does the Passover apply to me as a Christian? Does it apply to the church? And so we're going to answer that first question today, and then for the next 2 weeks, we're going to actually answer the last part of the question, how the Passover applies to the church and to Christians today. I'm going to read here from a chapter in John 19, verses 14 through 16. And it says this, "Now it was the preparation day of the Passover, and about the 6th hour, and Pilate said to the Jews, 'Behold your king.' But they cried out, 'Away with him, crucify him.' And Pilate said to them, 'Shall I crucify your king?' The chief priests answered, 'We have no king but Caesar.' Then he delivered him to be crucified, and they took Jesus and led him away." So there are some very important things for us to understand about the Passover. And the first thing is this: it is the Lord's Passover. It belongs to Him. And in Leviticus chapter 23, the Lord said, "These are my holy convocations." Number two, it commemorates the Israelites' redemption from slavery, from physical bondage, from slavery in Egypt. The third is that God gave this ordinance to us as an eternal ordinance, and we are to observe it forever. And lastly, we need to understand that the Passover is actually comprised of 3 separate convocations, or 3 separate ordinances. These being the actual feast of the Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which lasts for 7 days, and the Feast of First Fruits. Now, the Apostle Paul made a direct correlation between the Passover and the giving of the new covenant on the eve of the Passover and the crucifixion, the burial, and the resurrection of Christ. In 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7, it reads, "Therefore purge out the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, since you truly are unleavened, for indeed Christ, our Passover, was crucified for us." In this earlier passage in John that I read from, we see that Jesus was crucified on what is called the Day of the Preparation. Now this falls on the 14th day of the month of Nisan, which is the first month of the Hebrew calendar. And then beginning on the 15th day and lasting for 7 days is the actual feast of the Passover, or the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The Passover lambs were prepared for their slaughter and for their sacrificial offering on the 14th, and then beginning at the end of the day on the 14th and all the way continuing into the 15th is when the Passover lambs were actually sacrificed on the altar. And this is the exact time that Jesus was being tried and crucified. And that is why it is called the Day of Preparation. The feast of the Passover, therefore, and the Feast of Unleavened Bread become one continual sacrifice to the Lord, starting on the 14th and then leading all the way into the 15th. On the evening of the 14th is when Jesus actually observed the Last Supper, the last Seder, with his disciples. And it says here in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 25, it says, "In the same manner Jesus took the cup after the Passover supper, saying, 'This cup is the new covenant in my blood. This do as often as you drink it in remembrance of me.'" So on the Sunday that falls after the Sabbath, and this would have occurred after the Passover meal, after his crucifixion, and he was buried in the tomb, and on the first day of the week, on a Sunday, is when we would celebrate the Feast of First Fruits. Paul makes this connection here in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 when he says, "But now Christ is risen from the dead and has become the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep." And so the answer to the first question, what is the meaning of the Passover, is this: it represents to us as Israelites our redemption from physical slavery in Egypt, but now in Christ it also represents our redemption, our freedom from spiritual slavery, which is in sin that leads to death. These 3 convocations were given as a shadow, and exactly to the day and the hour Christ fulfilled each of these through his crucifixion, through his burial, and his resurrection from the grave. He also, on the eve of the Passover, on the eve of the 14th, made a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. And we are going to see in the next 2 weeks how that covenant now is given to the nations. And this is the meaning of the Passover, and that's the truth.